Today we are going to be going over a pretty stupid video from someone attacking Hunter Avallone, one of my favorite YouTubers, named Actual Justice Warrior, this guy right here. Let's just get into it because I don't really have much to say on the guy. If it would play.
Because they
There we
think
go.
this is the more popular position. But honestly, even if we are to take that at face value, that the person that's always being referred to as a grifter is a grifter, you have not made any substantial point against that person's argument. I think back to Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter, who is often attacked and chided as somebody who doesn't believe the things that she says because they're too outrageous. She's just saying that to make money. And her retort to these
Should we skip through his intro because it doesn't really say anything that we can counter?
Yeah, it's not. It's really not relevant.
Yeah, it's not too relevant.
Yeah.
Okay,
What
let's
we're
skip to
covering.
I think it's. Yeah, I think it's around
A little
here.
bit back.
A little bit back.
A little bit,
Right
little
here,
bit
good.
back. Probably right there. Yeah, right
got
there.
it.
Yeah.
Let's go.
commentary with enormous channels that are just not that bright. They're just not that informed. They're just not as logical as they present themselves as. That's why I always talk about people getting their talking points from Kyle Kalinske, who he himself is not that intelligent. He's not
like
that
Kyle
deep of a
Kalinske.
thinker. I don't talk a lot about people changing
I
their
do too. It's kind of funny, like him, that Actual Justice Warrior is saying this about him. He does have some bad takes, but like so
Yeah,
does everybody.
I disagree with Kyle on some things. I think he's pretty idealistic in some places. Like, I really disagreed with him on Force the Vote, for example. But overall, he helped contribute to my de-radicalization and conversion to the left. So I think he's very useful to the left, and I think he gets a lot of unwarranted hate overall from many on the left. So what do you guys think about him overall?
I would agree with what you just said.
Yeah.
I don't care much for Kyle Kalinske. Wasn't a big content creator for me that I would listen to very intently. So I don't like hate him, don't like him, just very ambivalent.
Okay.
For sure.
Oh, did you say something? You kind of glitched out for there for a second.
No, I was just like saying, like, for sure to Paul, like, that's valid. Like,
Yeah,
that's all I
definitely.
mean.
Okay, let's continue.
positions for money, even though that's the popular thing to do on the internet. And somebody who's extremely guilty of that is Hunter Avallone. And in fact, one of the videos that we're going to talk about today, because yes, we're doing two Hunter Avallone videos, or at least a piece of a second one after
We're not going to focus on the second one, by the way. We're just focusing on the minimum wage one.
I go through the first
Yeah.
one. Hunter calls PragerU a bunch of grifters for having a donation link.
Also, really love this right here. You literally cannot get the PragerU video without the grift. Donate to help PragerU fight censorship.
On a video where
Do you think PragerU grifts at all? Or what do you guys think?
So I don't know. Like, they probably like platform grifters, but I think like PragerU actually like has the goals that they like are trying to do. So like, I don't know, like there are grifters that appear on PragerU, but I don't know if the organization itself would be considered like grifting.
Dennis Prager at least comes across as like pretty genuine. He's just genuinely insane. I'm not sure about the rest of them though.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there's grifters involved with it, but I wouldn't
yeah,
say the organization itself is grifting.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue.
where Hunter Avallone, of course, has a donation link. Now, again, I don't think Hunter Avallone is a grifter, even though by his standards he is, because asking for donations makes you a grifter because he has that donation link in there. I just think that he's somebody who doesn't know a lot about politics. He's not very well informed, and he often just doesn't dig deep into the topics that he's talking about. And I'm going to show you that by looking over his video, 5-minute facts related to the minimum wage. And I have to say, I'm actually incredibly impressed by this video because somehow absolutely everything manages to be wrong with this video.
There's only one thing this guy gets right in this video, I believe, which we'll get into in a little bit, but geez Louise, I feel like he comes across as a little pretentious in how he says some of the stuff like that. Like pretty like
Oh, for sure.
very
Oh yeah.
I hate how confident some of these people talk because they're so wrong. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. Like a lot of times, if like you say things confidently, for like a lot of people in the world, that's like enough. Like they'll just like take your word for it because you said it confidently.
Oh yeah, definitely,
So, like,
especially.
And he might know that, like, and that's why he does that kind of.
Oh yeah,
the kind
definitely. You should
style
see. You should see Hunter Avalon's comment section on this video. By the way, it is just filled with AJW stands and stuff saying, "Oh, you got absolutely demolished by actual Justice Warrior. How's it feel to get destroyed, libtard shit?" It's hilarious. Okay.
First, from the title alone, it's called 5-Minute Facts, and the video is 8 minutes long.
True.
We
He
should
has a good
ask,
point.
why do we even have a minimum wage in the first place? The purpose of the minimum wage was to stabilize the post-depression economy and protect the workers in the labor force.
Now, when I say everything is wrong in this video, I mean literally everything is incorrect in this video. So he just said that the first minimum wage in the United States of America was passed to stabilize the post-depression economy. That is not the case. The minimum wage was passed during the Great Depression in 1931, first for federal contracts in the Davis-Bacon Act. Then in 1933, this got overturned by the Supreme Court because the federal government has no authority for minimum wage. And then again in 1938. None of these were after the Great Depression was over. These were all during the Great Depression.
The minimum wage was designed to create a minimum
Is he He's not talking about the federal the Fair Labor Standards Act there, is he? Because
He said all of them, so presumably, yeah, but that is incorrect because the Fair Labor Standards Act was in 1938, and after that, the Depression, like, that was post-Depression at that point. The Great Depression occurred from like 1929 to 1933. So if he considers the Davis-Bacon Act like as the first minimum wage, which it kind of was, but it was just like a rule for like federal procurement and federal employees and contractors, then like technically, sure, that was considered the first minimum wage, and it was implemented during the Great Depression, but it wasn't what we would consider as like the minimum wage, meaning like across the entire country, you can't pay anyone below a certain
Right.
price. Yeah.
Which is what we understand the minimum
Mhm.
wage to be. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like a little disingenuous for him to say.
I have something to
that-
say about that in a few minutes as we get into the video when he talks more about it. So let's continue a little bit more further.
standard of living protect the health and well-being of employees. Others have argued that the primary purpose was to aid the lowest paid of the nation's working population.
So one of the oddities about this video is that Hunter Avalon, and largely people on the left, present the minimum wage as if its stated purpose was the only purpose, point blank, period. When in reality, we know different. The Davis-Bacon Act, which was the first foray of the federal government into some type of minimum wage, was modeled specifically after a Canadian piece of legislation meant to price Japanese migrant workers out of the timber market.
I just want to say, by the way, I read his sources for this, and first off, he basically just proved there's another example of systemic racism still going on to this day, the David Bacon Act, so thanks a lot for giving me another reason to believe systemic racism is still an issue. Second of all, I looked for like 3 hours all over the internet, typing in a bunch of different search terms for between the Fair Labor Standards Act and the Davis-Bacon Act. I could not find one connection at all as to this being one of the purposes for the minimum wage for why FDR did it. It is like, I'm not sure if it's disingenuous or he's just trying to connect dots that aren't even there at all. What do you guys have to say so far about that?
I don't know. It just seems it comes off as like disingenuous to me because like this guy like claims to do his research and like if he had like if you were searching for that, like why wouldn't he have searched for that if he's gonna connect them? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
probably just disingenuous, but you can't really say for sure.
I looked everywhere, and I mean everywhere, for a connection between these two acts, and there was absolutely nothing. So I think either he's being bad faith or he's just like being ignorant and trying to connect something that isn't there. He's gonna say that it played a role in FDR's decision for the minimum wage, I think, in a few minutes, but he's
So once again, like he's considering that the Davis-Bacon Act was the first minimum wage, and that was used as like a tool of systemic racism by pricing out lower waged minority workers. So black workers, like black construction workers, tended to have lower wages than unionized white workers, and because of that, they were able to outcompete. So His claim is that for Democrats to like get support from like Southern voters and Southern constituencies, they would basically have to like pass this minimum wage law to basically price out um, more competitive minority workers in order to like, get that political support.
Yeah, and I have something I want to bring up, by the way, in a little bit. So,
And the reason Bacon requires, and by the way, it's still in the books to this very day, prevailing wages in all federal government construction contracts is because minority construction firms were out competing white construction firms because they were paying their workers less. The only way to compete against discrimination is to make people pay the cost of discrimination. You want to hire whites only? You're going to pay a premium for that when you could get the job done cheaper and just as good with these minority-owned construction companies. And since the Democratic Party needed the Dixiecrats in order to pass any...
I want to know, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't this before the party switch that ended up happening, I think, in the mid 20th century? This took place before the party switch, so that would basically means the Democrats back then were the modern day Republicans.
Yeah, they were conservative. Yeah.
Oh boy, he's part of the party that actually did this in the first place. I think he's a conservative, I'm not really sure though.
bit of F's agenda, this was included with his agenda. Now, after this piece of legislation worked in pricing minorities out of federal government contract work, they tried again in the National Recovery Act, and again, in a boon to Southern Dixiecrats, they threw in a national minimum wage. But thankfully, this minimum wage was struck down by the Supreme Court. Because while Congress did have the right to pay whatever wages they wanted when it came to federal government contracts, the Supreme Court, before FDR threatened to pack it, an overtly fascistic move, didn't recognize the federal government's authority, because it does not exist, to fix wages or any type of prices in the marketplace. However, post threatening to pack the court in 1938, FDR was successful in passing a national minimum wage. And just as the first minimum wage was intended, the purpose of this floor in labor was to decrease the price somebody would pay for discrimination and cripple African Americans and other ethnic minorities' ability to compete via lower wages with their white counterparts.
Currently, workers who earn the
Anything to say about that at all? Or...
I got nothing.
Yeah. I feel like he's still just being bad faith about that overall, because FDR really did say what his purpose was, and there was nothing that I could find about the Fair Labor Standards Act being racist or anything like that. He's just still trying to reach with that Davis-Bacon Act overall. Also, by the way, I forgot to mention this. You guys can pause the video at any point if you want to, if you have anything to say. So, just to let you know.
Okay, cool.
So I'm looking at Cornell Law School, and the whole idea of the Fair Labor Standards Act, the purpose of the minimum wage that was included among like a bunch of other schemes in that bill was to stabilize the post-depression economy and protect workers in the labor force. That was the stated position, but he's basically doing like that disingenuous thing of taking the Davis-Bacon Act, which was used as a tool of systemic racism, and then just trying to basically poison the well that since this first minimum wage bill was used as a racist policy, then that means like any minimum wage policy is intended to have those effects.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is definitely one of those cases. Yeah.
He's like conflating the two things.
Oh yeah,
That's
definitely.
the whole goal here. And his audience, his goal here is that his audience isn't going to question this part of it, and that's what he bases like his whole, at least, first argument off of, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what he has to say next.
federal minimum wage make about $7.25 an hour, and that is about 29% less per hour than their counterparts made 50 years ago after adjusting for inflation.
Now, we hear a ton of different metrics about how the minimum wage, if it adjusted for inflation, would be $25 an hour, would be $30 an hour, would be $57 an hour. But in reality,
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say it would be $57 an hour, by the way. I just want to put that out there.
If we pegged the original minimum wage to inflation, it would be $4.54, which is significantly lower than our current minimum wage. But whatever.
This is quite interesting because despite receiving 29% less per hour, minimum wage workers' productivity has gone up significantly. From 1979 to
So hold up. Right, like 10 seconds ago, Hunter said that minimum wage workers' productivity has increased substantially. That this graph does not demonstrate that. So
Yeah.
this is looking at the productivity of like all the workers in the economy, and Hunter is trying to portray this as minimum wage worker productivity has increased like 243%, which it is not
Yeah, yeah,
over
even
this time
I
period.
when I originally saw
Mhm,
that, I was even a little bit like,
mhm, yeah.
are you sure about that kind of thing? So I think this is probably the only thing that actual Justice Warrior gets right, because this,
Yeah.
and even if this is wrong, that doesn't it's not really a good argument overall for raising
Yeah.
the minimum wage. I don't see why people use it. So
Yeah.
we'll give him credit for when he debunks this.
2008, net productivity rose 69.6%, while the hourly pay of typical workers actually stagnated, increasing only 11.6% over 39 years after adjusting for inflation.
So this is absolutely great because Hunter Avalon is using a chart that I have previously debunked on this channel. However, I didn't really go fully into everything that was wrong with this chart in the previous video. In that video, I talked about the relationship on capital as a substitute for labor and how that can explain some of the disparity between productivity and hourly compensation. In this video, I'm going to talk about what this chart actually measures and why it is incredibly deceptive and why it's actually used by Hunter Avalon in a really deceptive way. So if you listen to him incredibly carefully, you'll hear him say net productivity versus the typical hourly worker's compensation.
Net productivity rose 69.6%, while the
69.
hourly pay of typical workers.
Now, why is that important? Well, first, we need to talk about where this chart comes from. It comes from the Economic Policy Institute, which is a very left-leaning organization that receives a lot of their contributions from labor unions who historically lobby for increases in the minimum wage because it helps them.
Okay, but overall, they're still pretty factual place for facts overall. This is like
Yeah,
one of the only misses I've
if we
seen from them.
check if we check the media bias fact check
I'll bring that up real
website, pretty
quick.
good website to checking whether any particular institute or media organization has a very strong bias or not factual. If you look up the Economic Policy Institute, they're center left. They're not like a radical left organization, and they do have a very high rate of factual reporting. The issue really isn't that, um, as actual Justice Warrior will bring up, it's not that they are like lying about the figures. It's just that it's people who take that data and then run with it and create like their own
Narrative.
narratives and various like policy ideas, like using that data. They just misconstrue it in like a wide variety of ways.
Oh yeah, I think it's
So people are
I,
using the data wrong rather
Yeah,
than like
yeah,
the
there's
data
basically.
wrong.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
yeah, probably that's especially people who are like hardcore advocates, like probably Ryan Knight and Brianna Joy Gray. They will misinterpret this kind of data, and I've seen them do that in the past. So yeah, it doesn't really look good for us when people just flat out mislead others with data and stuff.
Yeah.
Because without less skilled labor, then people are more likely to opt for union workers. Because even though you pay more, the difference between what you're paying and what their productivity is significantly less. If you price up low skilled labor, then those people become less advantageous for you to hire instead of union workers. This is why unions are always for raising the minimum wage, despite the fact that their workers always make well above minimum wage. Now, anytime you have statistics from an advocacy organization, you have to be incredibly skeptical when their statistical data lines up perfectly with their advocacy. However, you don't dismiss them out of hand. You actually have to look into the data.
Your mic, one of your mics, from either of you, there's a little bit of like the video playing in them. So I don't know who that is, but
Oh, that might be me?
Okay.
Here, I'll turn it down.
yeah, just turn it down a bit. And I want to
bad.
point out maybe something he gets wrong too by the end when he fully explains his explanation for that why this is wrong. I think there might be a little bit of bad faith going on in his chart as well. So
Data to figure out whether or not they check their biases before putting out these charts. Now, I'm going to point out first and foremost that we are comparing now, instead of minimum wage workers to their productivity, we're talking about typical workers, which is a complete moving of the goalposts. And regardless of whether or not this chart is true or not, it actually has nothing to do with the issue that Hunter Avalon's talking about. So that on its own is very deceptive.
Wait, let me just ask real quick. The productivity growth is talking about workers overall and the overall economy, right? But what about the compensation? Is that only taking in minimum wage workers as well? I didn't really look into that part.
So last I checked, I read like a lot of critiques of that Economic Policy Institute graph, and I believe it is only looking at the compensation of like lower wage workers, not just minimum wage workers, but like low wage workers generally speaking.
Uh,
And the productivity line is looking at just net productivity across the entire economy.
oh yeah,
So
that's
it's not really
definitely.
an apple to oranges. It's not really an apples to apples comparison,
Yeah,
basically.
that's not really fair to compare the wages of only low wage workers to the overall economy. That's not a fair thing. So I guess I gotta agree with him on that, but I do think there might be a little bit of bad faith in here. That doesn't really negate his point, but something that I just want to bring up that I researched a little while back.
It's significantly worse because this line right here is overall productivity in the private sector, and it's being compared to the typical worker, meaning that the productivity that we're seeing in this top line includes the work of managers, highly specialized supervisors, and people who are likely to boost up their productivity. However, what we're seeing in this bottom line doesn't include any of those positions. So already we have an apples to oranges comparison. If you were to include these highly specialized positions that are in the productivity in the wages compensated, then the lines would look more like this. To see this data in another way, I'm including this chart. Now this chart also includes the compensation for those highly skilled workers, but it doesn't combine them with the unskilled workers or the typical workers as referenced in the EPI chart. As you can see, it makes a huge difference when you include the productivity of this group, but not their wage.
When I looked up like what a typical worker is, it seems like he's not like it said that a typical worker is just someone that works like a full-time job. Like so I don't think that necessarily indicates that they have to be high skilled. It's just that they work like couldn't a minimum wage worker be a typical worker,
Oh
Paul?
yeah,
Or am I
definitely.
like
Yeah.
wrong there?
I
No, they.
think that would be considered a typical worker.
Yeah. I.
It's tough because like I'm not sure like what he means. Like I'm not sure if
He
like
doesn't.
we're
Right.
He
working off the
doesn't
same definition.
clearly. He doesn't
Yeah,
clearly lay it out what he
that's what I'm
says.
saying. Yeah, I don't know what definition he's working off of because like when I looked it up, like it's like he's saying that only high skilled would be like a typical worker. Seems what he's trying to say, but like when I looked that up, that wasn't what I
Yeah.
found anywhere.
Yeah, that's kind of
But yeah, that's all I
iffy.
gotta say.
hmm
Yeah.
Wages to we're actually seeing. But it goes even further than this, because one of the things that I always find incredibly deceptive is how you measure inflation in these charts. But this chart is one of the most deceptive pieces of propaganda I've ever seen in my entire life. Now, a common inflation metric you might have heard of is the CPI, or Consumer Price Index. Another less common measure of inflation is the IPD, aka the Inflation Price Deflator. Now, which of these two metrics do you think are being used for this chart? Think about it for a second. If you want to write in the comments A for the CPI and B for the IPD, then I'll accept that. Also in the live chat, just write A or B depending on what that corresponds to. And you're going to be wrong, because the answer is both. You see, the productivity is measured with the IPD, the Inflation Price Deflator, but the hourly compensation line, this line right here, is being measured with the CPI. Now, the reason this is incredibly important is that although these both measure inflation, they do it in completely different ways and they're not comparable. One of the criticisms of the IPD is that it is deflationary. One of the criticisms of the CPI is that it's overinflationary, i.e., it overestimates the cost of inflation, meaning that these two metrics are chosen in such a way that this chart is less subject to inflation on this end, but more subject to inflation on this end.
That's where I
meaning
think-
it is deliberately designed to boost up productivity
I want-
while lowering hourly
Pause.
compensation for the
Can someone
typical
pause this?
worker. if you were to chart these using the same
anyone able
metrics
to
for
pause
both,
this?
which is a basic thing that
Oh yeah, I got you.
Thanks.
the charts
Okay, so I want you to. This is where I think he's being a little bit bad faith, right? Because he never actually tells what the CPI and the IPD measure. The CPI here, I'm gonna pull it up real quick on my phone. It even says this in his source, so I'm gonna quote it. It says, "So which price index should we use? The fundamental difference between the IPD and the CPI is that the IPD measures changes in the prices of goods and services produced by businesses in America, and the CPI measures the change in prices of goods and services that are consumed in America, including those that are produced outside the states." So I think while it's not fair to combine every single worker into productivity, it's fair to use only like inflation, like this measurement, since it only measures what's going on inside America. And I think it's pretty fair to use the CPI to measure compensation growth with the CPI, because if you use the IPD for both, it would kind of be implicitly implying that we would only be consuming stuff inside America and not any sources or products outside of America if we use the IPD for compensation as well. So I think both sides are being a little bit bad faith here when they talk about this graph. So anything on that you guys want to say, or should we continue?
I guess one last note is I don't know who the researchers were who came up with this graph, but I could imagine them supporting this by saying the reason we used IPD for the productivity graph is because that's sort of like a supply side measure, because IPD looks at the prices of goods that are produced, and on the wage side that would give us like a better indicator of take home pay, using the CPI,
Yeah.
since that looks at prices of goods that are consumed and bought by workers. So I could imagine them coming up with that sort of defense, like if we were to like contact the people who created it. But just off the top of my head, I'm not sure like which would be better. But like I can see it going either way. You
Oh
should
yeah.
use one of them for both lines, or you could use it the way that they like originally made the graph. You know.
I think it really
Yeah.
depends on how you're using this data. Maybe it's not best used for arguing that the minimum wage should be increased, but I think it could possibly be used in a different way. But I'm just not really sure what. You
Yeah.
know. Okay. I want the video play.
respectively
go.
under the CPI and under the IPD. Now, I've never been to the Hunter Avallone School of Free Thought, but using advocacy statistics that are deliberately designed to increase the gap to advocate for your policy by leaving things out and using different inflationary metrics for things on the same chart seems a little not free thinking for me. It seems
I want to note, by the way, he's going to, Actual Justice Warrior is going to be using a survey from a fiscally conservative institute advocacy group type of source, which advocates for reducing the minimum wage. So there's going to be some hypocrisy coming up here soon.
seems like something I want to sign up for. It seems a bit deceptive. Now, I'm not accusing Hunter Avallone of being deceptive. I'm accusing Hunter Avallone of not knowing any better. He didn't look into this chart at all. There's no way he would have presented it, or anyone would have presented it had they looked into it for themselves.
I feel like he's being a little bit deceptive. Both sides are being a little bit deceptive here, because you notice, like, as I brought up earlier, he didn't tell what the CPI and the IPD measures. He just told what benefits his narrative as to why this chart is wrong. He doesn't tell, like, the actual thing, which would kind of give a little bit of credibility to the chart. So I feel like there's a little bit of deceptiveness going on his end as well. So
I did.
So would raising the minimum wage incrementally to $15 an hour really help? Well, according to the vast consensus of economists, the answer is yes. In a letter signed by 100 plus PhDs in the field,
So he also talks about this letter and says that 100 economists signed this, 100 PhDs, saying that you should raise the minimum wage to 15, and he calls that an overwhelming consensus.
So would raising the minimum wage incrementally to $15 an hour really help? Well, according to the vast consensus of economists,
Vast consensus of economists.
Which is really interesting because I trolled around the Economic Policy Institute's website, and even though this is the organization where Hunter got his data sets, and this is the organization that is advocating for the minimum wage. According to them, the overwhelming consensus among economists is that you shouldn't raise the
I want you to
minimum
notice
wage,
something,
not
by the
to
way.
15
Let me rewind here just by 1 second. I want you to see something in the top of his source right there. Let's play it real
overwhelming
quick.
consensus
Okay,
among
pause.
economists
Why
is
won't I
that you
pause?
shouldn't raise the minimum wage, not to $15.
I got you. My bad.
Okay, let's rewind
Five
one. There we
economists
go.
in the nation total. If he
Rewind
thinks
it.
that
There's something I really want to point out here.
All right.
Okay, so
economists signed
let me make sure I can pause it. Okay.
PhDs saying that you should raise the minimum wage to 15, and he calls that an overwhelming consensus.
So would raising the minimum wage incrementally to $15 an hour really help? Well, according to the vast consensus of economists,
Vast consensus of economists.
Vast consensus of economists.
Which is really interesting because I trolled around the Economic Policy Institute's website, and even though this is the organization where Hunter got his data sets, and this is the organization that is advocating for the minimum wage, according to them, the overwhelming consensus.
Okay, pause it right here. I just want you to see original article, Fox News opinion. So not only is he getting a source from a super biased area, but Fox News is citing this other source, which I'll bring up in a second when he kind of zooms in on it a little bit. Zooms in on the data, so we'll see that. Unpause it.
Among economists is that you shouldn't raise the minimum wage, not to $15, no way. But Hunter must think that there's like 105 economists in the nation total if he...
Pause. Okay, so I took a look at this survey. It talks about, let's see, I'm actually gonna bring it up right now. We're gonna look at it right now. Let's see how many people they surveyed, right? 197, right? So we scroll down and we see the actual statistics for it's 74%, right? But it's pretty obvious that this is not including the 105 economists that were surveyed by the Economic Policy Institute. Because let me see here, 197 times 0.74. That's 145 economists opposing it. But if you take that away from 197, 1 second, minus 145, that wouldn't be 105 economists. So it's obvious they're not taking the 105 economists into account. But if we add 105 onto this, that would be 157 economists in support of it. So in reality, if we're doing like an actual survey combining all these people together, the support for the minimum wage will be slightly in favor, but not too much. But I don't necessarily think this is really too much of a good argument either, since not only is it super divided, but it's kind of a, I think it would be called a argument from authority fallacy if you're to actually unironically use this as a full-on argument instead of using actual facts and statistics in favor of the minimum wage. So I don't think he was being bad faith here, because nobody ever actually reads these surveys and the sample size and everything of them. I just think he just saw it, was like, oh, look at that, Hunter's wrong, and just sourced it. So what do you guys think? You guys there?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you summed it up pretty well.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue.
He thinks that signing one letter is an overwhelming consensus.
according to the Congressional Budget Office, the $10 minimum wage would raise earnings for up to 3.5 million workers and have virtually no effect on employment.
So this is another thing that I noticed from Hunter Avallone, is that he uses outdated numbers to point out that there's not that bad of consequences in raising the minimum wage to a much lower...
I want to note, by the way, they're outdated because we don't really have too much like recent data on raising the minimum wage, since like we haven't really done it that much in like the past 10 years. Ever since we last raised the federal minimum wage, we haven't done it like too much to be able to grasp like actual numbers on what it does. But the numbers that do show that we do have from recently, which aren't, I don't think, very much, shows pretty good positive benefits overall.
Lower point than he's advocating for in his video. For instance, he talks about the Congressional Budget Office study that says there would be no real discernible effect on employment if you raise the minimum wage to $10, in a video where he's advocating for a $15 minimum
The
wage.
point of talking about that is to show that incremental increases will work, incremental increases to $15. So I feel like he's being pretty disingenuous here when he's kind of like saying, oh, you're talking about raising it $10 when you want to raise it to $15. But the point of talking about raising it to $10 is to show there will be minimal effect. And that's going to carry over if we keep making incremental increases to $15 starting from $10. So
wage. Now, this would be one thing if we didn't have CBO data on what they think would happen if we raise it to $15 an hour, but we do. And they said 900,000.
Okay, this is so bad faith, because if you look at the actual article, which I'm going to bring up right now, let's see here. Where is it? It talks about how that is only a 1.4% increase in unemployment. They do not leave that in because it'll just make it look like, it makes it look trivial, which it kind of is in the big picture. 1.4% increase isn't that much. Let me see if I can find it real quick. If you guys want to talk about that for a second while I look for it. Let's see. In 2025, 0.9 million fewer people would have been below the income poverty thresholds. Let's see. Just making sure. 17 million workers. 17 million workers will have wages below the minimums proposed by the bill. CEO estimates it during an average week in 2025, which is not a good thing, obviously. Let's see. I should have proofread this before. Here we go. Taking those factors into account, CBO projects that on the net, raising the Wage Act of 2021 reduced employment by increasing amounts over 2021 to 2025. In 2025, when the minimum wage reached $15 per hour, employment would be reduced by 1.4 million workers, or 0.9%. These are the same people who can complain about, oh, the COVID is only killing like less than 1% of people. You know, when you don't focus on the amount of people, like the percentage, it looks really bad. But when you actually look at the percent of people it's killing, it's not that bad. But they won't apply it to this. They won't apply that logic to this because obviously it makes their whole, like, it'll point out their hypocrisy basically between using the percentage and pointing out how this thing is trivial but this one isn't. So that's really bad faith if he actually researched into this and didn't just not read past the headline, you know? You guys got anything else to say?
Nah, I think you summed it up again pretty well.
Yeah.
People would be lifted out of poverty, but 1.4 million jobs would be lost. So maybe that data wasn't presented because it's not as interesting or compelling as the data that references a more modest increase in the minimum wage. But this isn't the only time that he does it.
This is not just conjecture, this is supported by the data. Extensive research has found that modest increases in the minimum wage had little or no negative effects on the employment of low-wage workers.
True.
According to a recent piece of economic research that examined the effect of prices on minimum wage increases in various states in the US from 1978 through 2015, found that a 10% increase in minimum wage only accounts for around a 0.36% increase in prices.
So he talks about marginal increases in the minimum wage here, and he clarifies later that he's referencing 10% increases in the minimum wage and the negative consequences from those 10% increases. But we're not discussing a 10% increase of the minimum wage. We're talking about more than doubling the federal minimum wage.
Well, yeah, and 10% increases. Hunter's never actually told how long he thinks it should take to carry out the $15 minimum wage. Freaking actual Justice Warrior is assuming how long Hunter thinks it would take to reach the minimum wage with minimal effects because he assumes Hunter is a leftist, which obviously he's not. He's a centrist right now. So this is pretty bad faith, kind of jumping to conclusions about how he thinks Hunter wants to carry out the minimum wage. Because based on how Hunter's describing it, there's a good chance that he thinks 10% increases are the best way to go about it with minimal effects, which is indeed true, proven by empirical data. And the funny thing is, you will not see this guy denying the facts, because it is true that 10% increases will have minimal effects. He cannot deny this because it is true. So, yeah, there's that. So
from 720 to $15 an hour. But it actually goes further than that, because remember, the law being proposed that's being discussed, as Hunter said in the beginning of the video, gets rid of the tipped minimum wage, which is currently at $2.13.
It would also eliminate the sub-minimum wage of $2.13 for tipped workers.
So we're multiplying that by 7 to 8 times what it currently is, and Hunter's giving me data on 10% increases in the minimum wage, as if that's any way applicable.
Personally, I believe
I mean, the tip wage is obviously exploitative. We should be getting rid of that. I don't know how he can like be against that.
It's
That's
because
ridiculous.
it's because he's a fucking right-wing reactionary who doesn't think raising minimum wage is good for some reason. He's only got one fucking thing right, and the one thing he got right was an argument which is completely pointless and shouldn't actually even be used by anybody. So that argument with the productivity growth, that is based entirely on like feelings and emotion, and like, we should raise the minimum wage, and if you don't like it, then you don't like low wage workers. And I just really don't like those kinds of arguments, because it just shows that there are ignorant people on both sides, and when like high ranking figures such as like Ryan Knight or Breonna Joy Gray or Jimmy Dore use stuff like that, it makes us look bad as well, and makes people assume that we are just filled with emotion, not the facts, when for the most part we have facts on our side, and not even actual justice warrior is able to debunk the fact that 10% increases are good. So yeah,
True.
solution to promoting small businesses would be allowing them to opt out of the minimum wage if they operate as a worker co-op.
And then he wraps it up with this, that co-ops will have an exemption from the minimum wage, because in all other circumstances, you the individual and you the employer can't be trusted to work out your own wage below a certain amount.
oh yeah, you can't. Minimum wage workers, I've never heard a case where a minimum wage worker was able to negotiate their wage above the minimum wage. I do not know.
Yeah, because there's an insane power dynamic, and like
Yeah.
what actual justice warrior is just ignoring here in a co-op, you all have like the same power. So like that's why he would be able to negotiate there, because there's no like chance for coercion or anything like that.
Yeah, like most of these, like, try negotiating your wage at a fucking McDonald's. Like, what is this guy on to think that's a good idea? Maybe you can negotiate your wages as like a lawyer or something, like a high ranking job where you're paid like 50-60K a year, but something like a minimum wage job, you do not have any negotiating power at all. They could just get rid of you and replace you with somebody else. You're expendable. They do not care about you at the end of the day. They just care about making more money, and it shows.
Yeah, if you look at the Fair Labor Standards Act that was passed in 1938, Congress did make exemptions for like executives, senior managers, and like professional workers, because these people tend to have higher bargaining power, since like the amount of people who have the skills or like the experience to be high level executives like are very scarce. Like they naturally have more bargaining power, so like that power dynamic is a lot less skewed in terms of the employer. So that's why they made that exemption even back in 1938, because like that was still the case even back then.
Yeah, let's listen to him kind of dig his hole a little more and show how ignorant he is on the negotiating power of the minimum wage worker, because that's just so weird.
However, join a co-op on the promise of potential future profits, the same way that a waiter waiting tables does it not for the hourly wage, but does it for the tips that they expect to get. That's going to be okay as long as you're in Hunter's favored industries. As long as you're in the left's favored industries.
What favored industries are those? I've never heard about like favored industries from the left or anything like that. Hunter's still not even a leftist, and I've never heard him talk about like the favorite industries thing, and I've never heard about even leftists talking about favorite industries. I think they want to apply this across the board to all industries and all businesses, like make the entire country filled with worker co-ops, which
Co-op's not an industry, it's like a business model, right?
yeah, it is a business model that everybody should adopt, but obviously that's not going to really work
But
right now.
He's calling it an industry right now, is what he's calling it.
Yeah, which is stupid, which is indeed pretty stupid. So
You're going to artificial advantage over other industries in not having to pay the same amount, because you might share future profits that may or may not exist down the line. That's totally fine. Everybody else, totally too stupid in order
Wait,
to...
no, I get what he's saying, that like the co-ops are just like leftist favorite industry when it has nothing to do with the industry. It's what I was talking about. It's the
Anybody
business
can
model.
any business can be a co-op. Literally
Right.
any business, even Amazon. Like, obviously not right now because Bezos and everything won't give up their power, but it could turn into one in the future if we fight hard enough for that kind of stuff. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
jeez Louise. It just shows how
So-
ignorant these people are on this topic.
So he's talking about this like in terms of like how governments would like grant subsidies to like specific industries. So like conservatives or like right wingers will tend to use a term called like picking winners. Governments will like give huge grants, huge subsidies to certain companies that they think either should succeed or should like make massive amounts of revenues and profits. That's kind of like what he's trying to allude to here, is that because Hunter is a lefty now, he wants to grant all of these special rights and privileges to co-ops because like that's, arbitrarily like the kind of company or kind of business organization that he wants flourishing.
Yeah. Let's finish this out.
negotiate their... It just makes perfect
Fucking
sense to
hate
have the
this
government
guy,
do it
dude.
for it, because
He's
minimum
so-
value...
Conservatives and their overconfident, like, egotistical attitude just really grinds my gears because they sound so confident yet they're so wrong, and it's really easy to debunk them, and then they just kind of go like, I don't really care, your studies are flawed, and all this stupid shit that they say to try to ignore the facts, ignore how wrong they are about so many different topics. It is absolutely nuts.
value of labor. Think about it. Look at this chart that I debunked freaking 4 different ways. Now,
A
no,
chart that doesn't really even benefit the argument either way, and that you spend like probably
It's the one point he's actually right on, though. So like you
it's the
gotta let
one
him
point
bring it up.
yeah, of course it's the one point he got right on, but it's the one point that I don't really think anybody should be using in the first place. So yeah,
normally I'd leave it right here. I've owned my opponent.
but I'm gonna leave it right
Ultimately,
here.
that's on Hunter for using it. Like,
Yeah, that's on Hunter for using it for sure. And yeah, he just kind of argued with a little bit of like lefty kind of feelings there, but overall he got pretty much everything else right. While this guy was just either being disingenuous, didn't read the poll, especially is what really kind of made me want to respond to this when I first saw it. And then I'm not sure if he was being disingenuous with the Davis-Bacon Act or if he's just super bad faith, because, again, if anybody who did research will find literally no correlation between the Davis-Bacon Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, so I have no clue. It just seems like a combination of ignorance and bad faith, which is basically conservatism in a nutshell.
Yeah.
true.
Okay, so anything else? Any kind of closing statements before we end the video?
Yeah, fuck actual Justice Warrior. That's my closing
Yeah,
statement.
pretty much. Just, what about you?
Yeah, I'd echo that. He was right on the productivity point, but this guy just his mannerisms, his way of presenting is very fucking irritating. But yeah,
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, well,
Yeah.
I guess we will wrap it up there. Hope everybody learned something new. I feel like I droned a little bit on too much on a couple of the topics, but I'm slowly trying to become more well spoken with these videos and stuff. Hopefully, I'm improving from the last video and stuff. So I guess that'll be
sure.
the end of it.
We'll
See
get
ya.
better in time.
What's up?
Yeah.
See you later, Pog Stoners.
See you later, Pog
See you.
Stoners.